In this video, we'll be combining two groups into one because the scale of their activities was much less than all the other groups. They wielded much less influence and there is generally less information about them. The first group we'll talk about is the Workers' Truth. The Workers' Truth, which Trotsky curiously labeled as the Workers' Untruth, is unique from the other left communist trends in that it acted and existed mostly outside of the party. The group's name comes from its newspaper of the same name, Rabochaya Pravda, the first issue being published in September 1922, about a year into the establishment of the new economic policy. The members of this group possibly came from a split in the prolet cult movement, which was influenced by Bogdanov, as they claim to have been inspired by him and his ideas. So before we talk about them, let's briefly discuss Alexander Bogdanov. Bogdanov was an old Bolshevik, and at one point, he was the number 2 Bolshevik in the party in regards to influence. In 1906, he would complete his treatise on philosophy, Imperial Monism, in which he attempted to synthesize Marx with the works of philosophers like Mach and Avenarius. By 1908, he was challenging Lenin for leadership of the Bolshevik faction, which prompted Lenin to attack Bogdanov's book with a polemic titled Materialism and Imperial Criticism in 1909. That same year, Bogdanov was defeated in the factional struggle during a conference in Paris. From there, he would travel to Italy, and with the poet Maxim Gorky and his brother Anatoly Lunacharsky, he would form the Veperd Group, a faction of Bolsheviks who criticized Lenin from the left. This group is typically designated as left communists, but I don't think the name applies, especially given that during this time, the communists still called themselves Social Democrats. In 1912, Bogdanov would leave this group, and he ceased revolutionary activities altogether. However, he still wrote about contemporary events and topics related to socialism. 3 of the ideas that he is known for are his concepts surrounding so-called proletarian culture, which he believed would supplant bourgeois culture. This concept would lead him to found the prolet cult movement in 1918. He would create his own independent system of philosophy called techtology, and perhaps his most interesting idea was the concept of God-building, which was expanded upon greatly by his brother Lunacharsky. These ideas of Bogdanov's likely influenced the group, but Bogdanov himself had no association with them. This group was quite small as well, comprising mostly intellectuals and some former members of the workers' opposition. There's no precise number on the membership of this group, but Ian Hebb states that it likely did not exceed more than 20 members and around a couple hundred sympathizers. But in 1924, a Menshevik magazine spoke of some 400 members being expelled from the Bolshevik Party when the group was eventually suppressed. This group had a strained relationship with the other left communist groups, and this was because of their adherence to Bogdanov's ideas, which would have run contrary to the Leninism of the other left communists. Another point of contention came from the fact that the Workers' Truth questioned the proletarian character of the 1917 revolution, arguing that the revolution was perhaps premature. They used arguments against the regime that sounded quite similar to the Mensheviks, and thus acquired the ire of the staunchly Leninist and Bolshevik left communists. In fact, their first published work, the 1922 Appeal of the Workers' Truth Group, was published in Sozialistischski Vestnik, a Menshevik emigre magazine in Germany. In this appeal, they write, "As a result of the October Revolution, all the barriers on the path of the economic development were eliminated. There is no longer any oppression by the landlords, the parasitic czarist bureaucracy, and the bourgeoisie, which relied on reactionary groups of European capitalists. After the successful revolution and civil war, broad perspectives opened before Russia, of rapid transformation into a country of progressive capitalism. In this lies the undoubted and tremendous achievement of the revolution in October. But what has changed in the position of the working class? The working class of Russia is disorganized. Confusion reigns in the minds of the workers. Are they in a country of the dictatorship of the proletariat, as the Communist Party untiringly reiterates by word of mouth and in the press? Or are they in a country of arbitrary rule and exploitation, as life tells them at every step? The working class is leading a miserable existence at a time when the new bourgeoisie and the netmen live in luxury, and recall in our memory the picture of the life of the bourgeoisie of all times. And again, long and difficult years of the struggle for the existence lie ahead. But the more complicated the circumstances, the more clarity and organization are necessary for the struggling proletariat. To introduce class clarity into the ranks of the working class of Russia, to aid in every way the organization of the revolutionary powers of the struggling proletariat, this is our task." The Workers' Truth, thus, were opponents of the society brought about by the new economic policy, which both legalized private trade and allowed small-scale capitalist enterprises to exist in the country. They were also very critical of the arbitrariness on the part of party and state officials who felt that since they now ruled the state, they could just do whatever they pleased, that they could act with impunity. The Workers' Truth believed that the Communist Party, which was now a revolutionary party turned ruling party, had lost its touch with the working class, and that a divergence in the interests of the party and the proletariat had become inevitable. They then called for the creation of a new workers' party, one which would genuinely have the interests of the workers at heart. Even though this group was small, had no big names within its membership, and wielded next to no political influence, the existence of a parallel communist entity that might possibly challenge the Bolsheviks during a time of great worker unrest was not acceptable to the party. The Workers' Truth had involved themselves in the strikes that were hitting the Soviet state between 1922 and 1923. This was enough for them to catch the eyes of the GPU. And in 1923, both Bogdanov, who was not even affiliated with the group, and the alleged leadership of the Workers' Truth were arrested. Some of the members of the group who were in the party were expelled, and then the organization was made illegal and forcibly disbanded. Thus, the group was killed quite young. It was not able to make much of itself. Despite that, the actions on the part of the Bolsheviks show how seriously they took such groups, no matter how small. The Workers' Truth could not link with other left communist groups. It was not prepared like them to survive the wave of repression. As Ian Hess puts it, this peculiar group, quote, in their instinctive defense of the workers, were too radical for the Bolshevik right and center, or for the conservative Mensheviks. In their analysis of October 1917 and its subsequent evolution, they alienated the communist left. Therefore, the Workers' Truth were not a group with the ability to survive for very long. Regardless, it still marks an interesting story in early Soviet history as an example of dissident communism. On the other hand, we have the Workers' Group, whose membership was also made up of lesser-known figures, but had as its central figure the Perm radical Gavril Myasnikov. Myasnikov had been expelled from the party in 1922, and he first formed the group in 1923 in Moscow alongside one Envy Kuznetsov, who had also been expelled from the party the year prior. This group was originally affiliated with the KAI, the Kommunistische Arbeiter Internationale, but they broke with them over their opposition to a united front with the Comintern. In February of 1923, before the upcoming 12th Congress, they wrote a manifesto espousing their ideas. When the 12th Party Congress did come, an anonymous document was passed around at the Congress, calling for the expulsion of the ruling Troika from the Central Committee, and for the party to adopt the positions advocated by the Workers' Group's manifesto. In their manifesto, they write that the bourgeoisie in its revolutionary epoch were once the advocates of civil war, but now, as the ruling class, they wanted nothing but social harmony and civil peace, class collaboration. But in the present epoch, the revolutionary proletariat are at all times, everywhere, the advocates of revolutionary civil war against the world bourgeoisie, and that they, the communists, will sow the wind because they want the storm. That, at the present moment, it was finally time for the expropriation of the expropriators. They write that the historical mission of the proletariat is to save humanity from the barbarism it has been plunged into by capitalism, and it is impossible to accomplish this by struggling for pennies, for the 8-hour working day, for the partial concessions that capitalism can grant it. No, the proletariat must organize itself firmly with the aim of a decisive struggle for power. In such a time, all propaganda in favor of strikes to improve the material conditions of the proletariat in the advanced capitalist countries is a malicious propaganda that keeps the proletariat in illusions, in the hope of a real improvement in its standard of living in capitalist society. Thus, for the Workers' Group, the workers must be under no reformist illusions, and must reject bourgeois parliaments and reactionary trade unions. They must move beyond demands for basic concessions. At the same time, the united front of the Social Democrats and the progressive bourgeoisie was an opportunist tactic, and instead, the Russian Communist Party and the Comintern should unite with the German left communists. They wrote that it was, quote, necessary for the unification of all revolutionary elements which have the aim of overthrowing world capitalist exploitation. They argued that the Comintern's requirement for entry, being adherence to the united front tactic, was dogmatic. They attacked Zinovia's policy and state that he who had once invited the workers to collaborate in the burial of the Second International now invited everyone instead to a wedding feast with it. They argued that the implementation of the NEP was inevitable because of the petty bourgeois nature of Russian society, a society dominated by its peasant masses. However, they also stated that this policy held hidden dangers within it, and that in order for the NEP to not descend into a new exploitation of the proletariat, then proletarian democracy must be emphasized so that the gains of October can be continually protected from petty bourgeois dangers within Russia. They lament the death and sidelining of the Soviets, and call for their reinvigoration, and a reformation on how the Soviet government operated. They wrote that Sovnarkom and the Rabkrin should be abolished, and that the former's work should be taken up by the All-Russian Executive Committee of the Soviets, which would then appoint members to government posts. In the end, for the workers' group, proletarian absolutism must be maintained, and more needed to be done to uphold the power of the proletariat in the government. The ideas espoused by the workers' group in their manifesto were attacked by Trotsky, Radek, Bukharin, and Zinoviev. Shortly after the Congress, Myasnikov was arrested and then exiled to Germany on a trade mission. With him gone, the workers' group operated under the leadership of P.B. Moisev and Kuznetsov for the rest of the year. The workers' group was quite opposed to the Workers' Truth, a group which Myasnikov had denounced as Menshevik. For one, the Workers' Truth had described the present Soviet state as progressive capitalist, which the workers' group staunchly disagreed with. And similar to the workers' opposition, the Workers' Truth believed in recapturing the unions, wishing for them to evolve by transforming them from tools for economist demands to more politicized organizations. Myasnikov and the workers' group had the opposite view. For them, the unions weren't just non-revolutionary, they were blatantly counter-revolutionary. The organizations that they believed should be empowered were not the unions, but instead the Soviets. In their manifesto, they denounced the Workers' Truth and the Democratic Centralists as liberals, and in 1924, Myasnikov declared that they had no association with the Workers' Truth, stating that the Workers' Truth wanted to remove everything communist about 1917, that they were completely Menshevist. The one thing that these groups had in common was their willingness, unlike the other left communist groups, to act outside the party. The Workers' Group would eventually reach the point of calling for the formation of a new party like the Workers' Truth, but this was not always the case. As the name of the group suggests, they were the Workers' Group of the Russian Communist Party. The Workers' Group had initially intended to work within the party in order to reform it. As Ian Hebbs puts it, initially, as its name implies, the Communist Workers' Group considered that it was a fraction of the RCPB and worked to regroup revolutionaries on the basis of its program, whether through work inside the party and the trade unions, cooperatives, as well as the Soviets, or outside these organs, which were by this time tied to the state. They supported workers' strikes and demonstrations. In this latter respect, they broke with Soviet legality and the loyal opposition strategy of the Democratic Centralists who worked solely within the party, and the more right-wing so-called left opposition, which was beginning to emerge. However, deportations, arrests, and expulsions would make such a plan untenable. So as Ian Hebbs shows, they switched their strategy, going beyond simple, loyal opposition like the Brest-Litovsk group had been 5 years prior. The workers' group produced agitprop leaflets, manifestos, and ran a regular press. They managed to smuggle their literature both inside and outside Russia. Much like the Workers' Truth, this group was pretty small, with possibly around 300 to 400 members in the summer of 1923. And yet, despite their small size and little political influence, they were still viewed with great hostility by the leading Bolshevik party. As Ian Hebbs puts it, quote, "It was not their numbers which threatened the party, however, but their willingness to intervene in the workers' strikes and their potential to give a political lead to elements inside and outside the party and organize them." So, when they planned to intervene in the spontaneous false strikes by organizing a general strike, the group found itself repressed by the GPU, and its main leaders were arrested and expelled from the party, with others being given simple reprimands. Despite the repressions, documents have shown that this group managed to survive at least until 1930, and were still producing their newspaper in Moscow. When Myasnikov managed to arrive in France in 1930, he began to work with KPD members and ex-Bordigists in the magazine Le Vieux Communiste, where he was able to publish some of the workers' group's documents, as well as maintain a network of correspondence with other exiles. Even when the other left oppositionists were expelled from the party and other members sent to prison camps, the ideas, beliefs, and discussion on the part of these left communist groups did not cease. Instead, they operated underground, clandestinely. Their members, even within the prisons and abroad, still held discussions on the fate of the revolution and the necessary next steps. Essentially, they acted like they had as Bolsheviks under the Tsarist state some 20 years ago.